Welcome to Coal Nation, the official podcast of the American Coal Council. Join us as we dive into the critical conversations shaping the future of coal. From industry experts to policymakers, we're exploring coal's essential role in America's energy, economy, and global trade. Whether it's powering communities, driving innovation, or securing strong global economies, coal is at the heart of it all. ACC, proud to be American, proud to be coal. Coal Nation starts now.
Welcome to Coal Nation, the podcast where we bring your conversations at the heart of America's coal industry, where energy meets community and innovation drives resilience. I'm your host, Emily Arthun, CEO of the American Coal Council. And today I'm joined by Myles Recny, co-founder of Realm Alliance. Realm is all in on U.S. coal, and their vision is bold. Coal is irreplaceable, has been overlooked, and is now poised for an evolution, even a renaissance. Myles believes coal must embrace the cutting edge, AI, and advanced technology to secure its future. We'll talk about energy demand in the age of artificial intelligence, how AI can revolutionize coal's workforce, and why coal needs to seize this moment in history to innovate and lead. So let's dive right in. Myles, it's so great to have you with us today on Coal Nation.
Emily, thanks for the intro and thanks so much for having me. I'm a big fan of your work and very grateful to be here.
Well, that's great. Myles, there's so much conversation about AI and data centers right now and just the energy needed, but we're going to talk a little bit different about what you guys are doing, and it's very exciting for our industry. I guess let's start with your company, Realm Alliance, who you are, what you're doing, and why is your mission focused exclusively on coal?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are a US-based AI software company, and our mission is to bring AI to bear on problems in the coal mining industry. The co-founders are myself and Eugene Marinelli. We both did quite a substantial amount of time at Palantir in the past. Eugene founded a company called Blend, which he took all the way to IPO, and I founded a company called Even, which was acquired by Walmart. We are particularly interested in coal because we see a huge market opportunity under the current administration to help coal service this energy demand surge. And there's a slightly kind of pro-America and sentimental reason where we feel that coal has traditionally been overlooked by Silicon Valley. It has this huge mission to fulfill currently, and we think it deserves to step into that mission and be recognized.
That's great. I truly believe we're have our moment with the administration and everything they're doing for coal, and coal has always been there. And we have seen the grid through some tough times, and to actually be acknowledged for it is great. And to see new interest and new technology coming in is fantastic. We talked a little bit about the explosion pre-AI versus post-AI, and what are the numbers and what do they mean for coal? How do you see coal really fitting into that?
Yeah, so coal, I think, currently represents about 15 to 16% of the US energy mix. And that's obviously down over the past 2 decades, perhaps starting from 2008, substantially, which I would view as a shame. Now, with, the US wanting to outcompete China basically in the AI race, we're seeing a profusion of new data centers being built and new AI workloads that those data centers need to service. So, in a sort of conservatively optimistic case, you could see coal's position in the energy mix go up to 20-25%, and that would largely be driven by the energy demand from AI. Another way to think of that might be, data center demand or data center demand as defined in total gigawatt US energy demand. So we're talking about a gap from, let's say, 1,100 gigawatts around 2018, 2019 to 1,800 gigawatts for 2030. So coal is well positioned to kind of, take advantage of that surge, given that it's already, integrated well into the grid. It's tried and tested. It doesn't just work, dependent on the weather, and it's a highly available and readily dispatchable source of energy.
That's great. One of the things we heard in Park City at our recent conference is the utilization of just the coal-fired power plants that exist today in the United States. There's a lot of growth that can just happen back within the capacity of those plants, which I think is a really good thing for the country, because if we just scale back up our use of coal, we're going to see a stability in the grid that needs to happen. What are your thoughts on that, especially with the AI and the data center revolution?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's entirely correct. It's all very well to, suppose that gas, renewables, and nuclear can fill this gap. But the AI boom is happening now, and it is, in my view, like a matter of national security. Like, do you want to live in, a US centric world or a China centric world or a multipolar world somewhere in between? And coal is that reliable source that's available now that's easily dispatchable. And so we can't wait around to, like, as some would say, like, do the right thing with renewables. And it's a matter of priorities. We need to meet this demand right now.
Absolutely. I like how you said that. We're here right now, and we can power the grid for what is needed right now, which is great. One of the things that we're seeing certainly is this administration is very much pro coal, pro AI, and I believe they see how those two work together. What opportunities do you feel are opening up for coal right now?
Yeah, well, so obviously, the current administration is a breath of fresh air for coal. We've seen some of the EOs that President Trump has made. Even this week, I think on Monday, we're seeing a large investment into coal-fired plants and the release of federal lands for potentially building new ones. So we need to take the bull by the horns, strike while the iron is hot, and kind of cement our way into what some might frame as a bridge or a short term, 20, 25% of the energy mix, but actually future-proof that by, in that sort of bridge moment. And I don't want to think of it as a bridge moment. I want to think of it as an enduring path, but proving that we are effective, forward thinking, readily available, readily dispatchable, and up to the challenge.
I love that. I love the enduring conversation. As a lot of times when I speak, I don't like the word transition, because that certainly means you're moving from one to another. We talk about evolution, but enduring is correct. Coal's been here through standing this country up, and it can endure and continue to evolve and be exactly what it needs to be for the future success of our country and everything that goes along with that. We
Absolutely.
talked a little bit when I first met you about your background, and I found it very interesting, including your background in mining. So, do you want to take just a moment while we go kind of back and get to know you a little bit better?
Yeah. And so I don't want to overstate my background in mining too much. Primarily I am, by training a software engineer, and I've done some entrepreneurship in software. That said, I'm currently working in mining, and it feels a little bit full circle with my father, now deceased as of about 20 years ago, American citizen. The other parent is British, I should say, which might explain some of the confusingness of my accent. But he studied geology and then mining and mineral, and went on to stand up a big global consulting firm that serviced the mining industry in the US, out of Australia, and also on the African continent. So there's a little feeling of a full circle. I myself was born in the UK, and from 5 through the end of high school, grew up in Australia, and then went to college in the US in North Carolina, and have stayed in the US for most of the past 20 years. But I'm currently based in London with lots of back and forth to the US. I consider myself kind of Anglo-American Australian. I'm a US citizen. And so whilst it may be jarring for someone with my accent to be waving the American flag, it comes from a genuine place and a genuine concern.
Thanks for that background. I want to expand on a couple things as we're talking. We were talking about the enduring piece of coal, and you're coming into an industry that historically has had some rough times in the past couple decades. and has not always been popular. And here you are, a company that's promoting coal and the use of coal. And tell me give me some background on how you guys decided that this was a great combination, a little bit deeper dive into how did you come to like coal?
Yeah. Well, I would say there is a little bit of serendipity there, right? So perhaps Realm started thinking about, let's say, engaging with this like infectious um, wave of let's get excited about reindustrializing America. And, part of that is energy independence. AI is a big overture to all of that. And then, serendipitously, we started working with a premium American met coal mine, and it was kind of like eye-opening. This is like a serious industry doing serious physical things, right? We're not here to make AI girlfriends. We're here to help a critical input to the energy mix endure, survive, and flourish. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, absolutely. And if we could dive a little bit further and just to the metallurgical coal, you talked about it was an eye opening, and not so much the company, but just the eye opening experience, because I believe that's really what we see when I go out and talk to people and talk about coal. They're like, well, we didn't know, we didn't understand. And so what was one of those key moments when you became involved in that project that was like, wow, this is really good stuff?
Well, I think one of the key moments was probably around safety. And that's like a big theme for us, but realizing just how, critical safety is, and also like how diligent and vigilant you need to be in maintaining it, obviously with the backdrop of the reality that like in terms of met, like underground coal mining is really, really dangerous. And then via our technical approach, seeing that we could make a real difference there. Safety is important for the obvious reason that we want to keep people safe and healthy, but also from a business point of view, safety incidents do often represent cost and represent downtime. So in the vein of trying to help coal kind of meet this surge challenge, it's super important from the business point of view as well.
Absolutely. I love that conversation, because I think I had a conversation several years ago in DC, in one of the house buildings, and we were just standing in the security line, and this individual said, well, you're one of the most unsafe industries out there. And I'm like, well, hold on. Let's have a conversation about that we are highly safe, and the things that we do every day to improve our safety and make sure our employees go home safe is important to us. And after having that conversation, it's just such a false narrative that, well, yes, it's an industrial environment. Every day we're doing things to make sure people go home safe.
Yeah, absolutely. And you see that in the attitude of the safety managers and what their goals are. Obviously, the number of protocols that need to be followed. You could argue that, some of that is burdensome, but as a safety manager who I spoke to recently said, every part of Title 30, like the rules, dictated by MSHA are inked in blood, right? And some of the younger heads at the mine haven't been around long enough to know that. But those rules are there for a reason. And so, we can get into it later, but, we also have a stance in terms of like making the connection and the relationship between mines and MSHA a little more fruitful.
Absolutely. I think that's great. Having worked at mine, one of the first things I remember about safety is an MSHA inspector come up and saying, holding the MSHA book and going, every rule in here was written in blood, and we all need to recognize that. So that's a great reminder for anybody that's listening. That's great. Thank you for that. And I think we're going to take a short
Absolutely.
break.
Great. Thank you.
American Coal Magazine is the #1 trusted publication connecting leaders across the entire coal supply chain. For more than 2 decades, American Coal has been the definitive voice of our industry. An industry that powers America, strengthens manufacturing, and fuels innovation. From reliable power generation to breakthroughs in carbon materials, advanced manufacturing, and next-generation technologies, we showcase the people and solutions driving coal's future. When you feature your company in American Coal, you do more than advertise. You stand alongside the leaders shaping the future of coal. You showcase your expertise, reaffirm your brand as an industry partner, and connect directly with decision makers who have the purchasing power to move business forward. Be seen in ACC's American Coal magazine and showcase why the industry should be working with you.
Welcome back, everybody. Before we dive deeper into the technology of AI, we always like to do a little short segment where we get to know people a little bit better that we're talking to and have a little bit of fun with some fast fire questions. And so let's get started. Myles, tell us a little bit more about yourself. Our listeners love to get to know our guest, and tell us how you start your day.
Yeah. So I'm one of those nutcases who doesn't eat breakfast and drinks far too many cups of coffee in the morning. And then I have to get in a sauna session followed by a cold plunge in order for my brain to be fully activated.
Now you're hardcore. Sauna session, then cold plunge. Can you?
It's the best feeling in the world.
I have heard that. I'm not brave enough to do the cold plunge. Hey, when you're not working, how do you spend your time?
Well, I should say that there's not a ton of not working time. That's the nature of a startup. But, I might be cooking dinner for my fiance. She does a lot of cooking as well. I might be reading or listening to other podcasts, or I might be composing and performing pretty bad sort of folk music with my acoustic guitar.
I love to read. I'm actually reading The Anxious Generation right now. What are you reading?
Mm-hmm. I'm reading a book by Lev Grossman called The Bright Sword, and it's a retelling of the story of King Arthur with a lot of quirkiness and humor thrown in. And I'm a big fan of that sort of, you wouldn't call it history, right? But sort of mythology. And so I've been having a lot of fun with that.
Excellent.
What do you take from
Those are kind of fun to read.
The Anxious Generation?
It's very enlightening right now about how that generation is changing because of technology and the things that probably were taken for granted, playing outside in groups with kids out on the streets, and the lessons learned as kids can be together in groups and going back into technology. It's pretty enlightening of what's happening because we're missing that social interaction at a younger age, in-person interaction.
100%. Yeah, very concerning.
If
It
you
needs to
could
be
sit-
addressed.
Yeah, it is. It's a very interesting story to listen to. If you could sit across from an AI leader today and have lunch, who would it be?
Yeah, so I think, and it's perhaps going to sound a little like Silicon Valley cliche, but I think I would go Elon, who I guess, perhaps wouldn't have historically been thought of as an AI leader. But you obviously have to consider Tesla and all of the computer vision work that goes into that. And then, more recently, after the acquisition of X, the birth of Grok, which has and will have more of its own data centers. And, regardless of how Elon might feel about coal, one thing that I really admire about him is that he's been a really strong advocate for free speech, both in how he's managed Twitter now X, but also Grok. So, Grok being X's kind of answer to ChatGPT, where you can think back to not that long ago on some of the hyperscaler chat platforms like ChatGPT and Google Gemini, where some of the wokeism, shall we say, of those institutions really seeped into the way that the AI interacted and responded with to you, where, like, for example, I remember people asking Google to generate images of Vikings, and these were like not people of Scandinavian descent. So I think, it's really important that the AI not be culturally or politically biased in any way, because that's the most direct channel to actually getting the truth. And I think Elon's ability to sort of resist those pressures has been really inspiring to see. So that's who I would sit across from.
It's funny that you bring up just the way AI responds. And I know as the longer that you use it, it starts to understand how you're wording things. But the first time I used Copilot to help write just something that I was putting out about coal, I was actually surprised at the response I got back because it was a little more anti-coal than I had expected. And so when you talked about that wokeism's kind of seeping in. That was the first so now that I've used it more, it definitely knows my style and knows what I'm talking about. But I did find that shocking the first time that I used it. I was like, "Oh, it already has an opinion."
Yeah, I see that a lot as well. Even, in preparation for some of this, like interacting with LLMs, large language models like ChatGPT, Copilot, Grok, what have you, and asking it for its opinion on the trajectory of coal in the US energy mix as dictated by AI energy needs. It's like, well, let me give you several scenarios. The bad scenario is the one in which coal hits that 25% energy mix. So it does have its default biases, and it's kind of humorous in the moment, but that's something that I think for us to make most effective use of AI needs to be steered clear of.
Absolutely. So one thing, we're kind of talking about being misunderstood and AI directing conversations. What do you think is one thing that if you could tell people today that you wish they understood about coal?
So I think for me, it would be, we talked about working with a met coal mine. It's like the people. I think, I come from the Silicon Valley world primarily, and the view of the coal industry is it's backwards, it's overly polluting, it's the wrong kind of people. And I don't want to cast the entirety of Silicon Valley like that, but that has been the opposite of my experience. And what I would really highlight is the sort of engineering minded brilliance of some of the people I've worked with, where they actually have a really, really smart idea, for example, around how AI could be implemented in the separation process. And they're like, can you bring that to fruition for us? So I think there's a deep misconception about the people and the talent in the coal industry. And I realize that there's an ongoing conversation about attracting talent and workforce shortages, but that's how I see it.
That's perfect, and it's a great lead into our next conversation, because I believe that AI. When I'm out talking to people and we talk about, just about technology and computing and different things, there's a skepticism about what's going on. And so for AI 101, for the cool listeners of this podcast, can you talk about what's the difference between AI and traditional computing and why it's not something to be scared of?
Yeah. So traditional computing, this is what we've been used to for years and years. And I would say prior to the release of ChatGPT, there were sort of precursors to ChatGPT going on. But I think that the release of ChatGPT, and that's 2022, was probably the big aha moment. Was probably the big aha moment for a lot of people. So, that traditional computing is as a computer programmer, right? You're giving the computer kind of like a recipe in cooking, right? Step one, do this. Step two, do that. If X, then Y. It's very deterministic. And AI, kind of because of the way that it's built, we're kind of under the surface, it's more probabilistic and more about prediction, manifests as something more like a smart assistant, where you can, for example, give it a goal and it will go and figure out how to achieve that goal. You can, upload a spreadsheet to ChatGPT and say, okay, I want you to figure out the average of the values in production and yield. And you don't have to say, and by the way, the production column is column B and it's spelled with a lowercase p, and the yield column is actually called clean coal and it's column F, right? It can just figure those things out. It's like having a smart assistant that can infer things. And that's really powerful. So, you give it a goal and it figures out how to get there. And not just in terms of manipulating knowledge and information, but also in terms of interacting with other systems, right? You could say, okay, here's a live camera feed looking at coal traveling along a chute. If there is a blockage, and you're going to figure out whether or not there's a blockage from looking at it, right? So it's sort of human level visual capabilities. I want you to then turn off that chute or turn off the supply to that chute in the SCADA system. So that's another goal-oriented example. And then you could also, with AI, as opposed to traditional computing, not have a goal in mind, and say, hey, go and figure stuff out for me. So an example of that might be, okay, here is access to a factory talk instance, right? So this is a very popular SCADA system in coal mining. We have all sorts of data tags that represent, various pieces of equipment on the mine. I want you to go from now and back over 2 years and just figure out correlations between things that we couldn't even conject. We couldn't even hypothesize about correlations across, let's say, downtime in like system thresholds across 12 different data points. So wildly different than traditional computing, and something I think has a lot to offer, Cole.
For sure. So yesterday I had the opportunity to go on a tour and was down at Peabody's mine, North Antelope Rochelle mine, and was able to go into their dispatch center. And you've got so much data coming in from the pit, haul truck, shovels, drag lines, information, where it's going, if they have to move a truck to another area. And then all the way from there to when it comes into the plant and where it's going, as far as their utilities, what their customers, and all that information is there. And you have 3 people that are checking and moving and doing everything. I would assume that you would see AI as an assistant to those individuals in helping, maybe catching something a little bit sooner, like you were talking about the belt. Maybe it's something a little bit sooner that an AI could address quicker, with less downtime, and assisting those 3 individuals with the job, not necessarily taking over the job.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a great, example. And I agree with the point that, it should be viewed in via an assistive lens rather than replacing people. Again, I'm repeating myself, but like if we're talking about workforce shortages, the issue isn't that we're like, that the scary AI is going to take your job. It's that it's gonna, it's gonna be like hiring 20 extra smart and diligent people that work tirelessly 24/7 and can look at patterns across, like in an instant, look at patterns across 10 different systems. So I think that's the sort of positive and realistic way to look at it.
Perfect. So one of the things that I was so intrigued about when the first time we ever talked was how you see AI and Realm really working for safety and continuing to improve safety and help. Can you talk about some of the things that you're doing around safety and really helping to promote companies to be a safe environment?
Yeah, absolutely. In answering this question, I'll walk through a little bit about how Realm works. So what we do is integrate with a mine's existing camera system, so their set of CCTVs and other video and imagery sources. So dash cams looking at, outer and inner view, and also drones. So a really, really classic use case is, hooking up your camera system to Realm. And we do that integration ourselves. And then it's like you have the equivalent of like a friendly robot who's watching every camera feed 24/7. And because we've also ingested your employee face database, it knows who everyone is via facial recognition. So it's then possible for us monitoring all of those feeds to say, hey, John Smith does not have his hard hat on, or is not wearing his goggles or his high visibility vest. And then we can immediately notify the safety manager or John Smith himself, right? So that's one way. We also have like a historical record of all such occurrences. And, one part of our product is like a safety dashboard where you can get a view of who's been performing well and who's been performing less well, so that your sort of feedback to the team on safety can be more targeted rather than kind of a broad shotgun approach. Another safety example would be, spotting that someone is in an unsafe area. So again, using CCTV, we might be looking at an underground conveyor and noticing that someone is like working on a bit of roofing over the unguarded and moving conveyor, right? And so that's like an instant red flag. The point is, applying AI to these existing systems, you can get a huge return on investment on them that you didn't previously have, in this case, in terms of safety. I'll give a third example for safety. You could imagine that Realm is sitting in the background, monitoring every feed, every dash cam, every drone picture. And it also is trained, which means which is a way of saying it understands all of Title 30. So it can, look at a picture of, a portal and say, hey, those 2 fire extinguishers are like on the ground and they need to be like attached to the wall in their proper placement. There's some electrical wire hanging from the roof. There's a bolt out of place here, and someone is lighting up a cigarette here in the bottom right-hand corner. These are all of the codes in Title 30 that would correspond to, the likely fine that you would get if an inspector saw it, and what we should do immediately to resolve this. And if Realm had access to your work order system, it could even issue, and assign the work order for corrective action to the right person based on who they are, what their training is, their proximity, and whether or not they're on shift. So you can automate whole cycles like that in terms of safety. And the point there is not to overburden the mine with like a bunch of stuff that they potentially already knew. It's about noticing subtle changes in the environment over time and getting ahead of inspections, spotting stuff the inspector is going to spot before they do, thus kind of like reducing the burden of inspections.
So I would guarantee that you've already thought about this. And if I dig back into my experiences working in the mines and introducing new technology, it's always met with skepticism. A big brother is watching over me, and I'm very concerned about what they're going to see and how that's going to affect me as a worker in different things. So how do you, and I'll go one step further. I mean, even when you travel today, going through security is a lot of facial recognition. And I have conversations with people when I get back into Wyoming, and they're like, doesn't it concern you that they're taking all these pictures and you can be seen and recognized instantaneously and different things like that? And so how do you foresee really being a positive when it's rolled out to a workforce so that they embrace it rather than absolutely dig in and say, this is the worst idea ever and it's not going to be healthy for our organization?
Yeah, I think that's a completely valid question. And some degree of like skepticism about this is healthy. I mean, we often look at, China as like, the world's most advanced police surveillance state. And I think rightly view that as a dystopian thing. So 2 things I would say is that like when the use case is safety, I think it's acceptable to take on an extra degree of surveillance when the end result actually literally could be saving lives. And secondly, that kind of facial recognition functionality, that's opt-in, right? That's the choice of the mine. We can still say, hey, we can say someone is not wearing their PPE or someone is in an unsafe area. We should shut down this conveyor belt immediately without calling out their identity and without like recording it. So I think you ask a valid question, and I think some amount of pushback there is expected. So it's about, what degree of adoption of that the mine and their workforce is comfortable with, but also what kind of greater good are we serving?
Absolutely. So it's telling a story around the importance of it and how it's going to improve the outcomes.
Yeah. And I might add a final point, if I may. There's also a security aspect here, right? So with facial recognition, you could also detect if someone is approaching the site bearing a weapon who is a non-employee, right? That might be interesting. I had a conversation last week with a mine who have recently erected a pretty substantial overland conveyor belt, and they wanted to be monitored by drones 24/7. And, for several reasons. One is that they want to detect thermal anomalies. So this is a drone equipped with a thermal camera. It's then plugged into Realm, which analyzes every frame and can point out, hey, that roller is overheating. There's an issue. Or the belt is damaged. But back to the sort of facial recognition question, we also want to see if someone, from the public, as it were, is tampering with the belt or trying to steal like copper stores that are nearby. So, it's a cost benefit question, but there are, especially security related examples where like you really want to know if this person is in your employ or not.
Absolutely. That's great. 2 more questions. Why is now the moment for coal to embrace AI? And what happens if the industry misses this window?
Yeah. Well, so first of all, like AI is here. That wasn't true 4 years ago. Secondly, the administration is not only stepping out of the way, but is in our court. And there's a really, I think, kind of honorable mission here to be served, which is being competitive with China in the AI race, which I view as a matter of national security. And so I think coal does need to take this opportunity to shine. There's another point, which is we've touched on workforce shortages a couple of times. I remember it came up in the roundtable on one of your recent episodes. If coal can be perceived as an industry that is kind of forwardly adopting AI, innovating as good or better than the rest, and implementing AI systems to achieve these goals, that then becomes a more attractive prospect for young talent. It's like, hey, I'm going to go work in the coal industry and I'm going to become expert at using these AI systems. I feel like there's one use case that I really wanted to talk about before we get to the last question, which is also about computer vision and something that we've been building out with the met coal mine I mentioned previously. And really salient to meeting increased demand for coal, which is optimizing the froth flotation process in the prep plant. So you could imagine a camera watching a flotation cell. The camera is plugged into Realm, and it's watching the flow dynamics of the cell. It's watching the bubble size and distribution, right? And this is something that a computer is uniquely suited to do. Obviously, a computer enabled with AI, you're not going to, as a human, sit there and count thousands of bubbles in their sizes millisecond by millisecond. But this is something that AI can do. And then it can infer how close that flotation tank is to an optimal state. And if it's hooked into the SCADA system that controls the tank, it can readjust the balance of chemicals in the tank in real time, basically to get a more optimal separation result. And so what we're hoping for is to have this sort of like AI-enabled flotation cell pilot that sits there 24, whenever you're running flotation, and ultimately produces sort of a 2 to 5% increase in yield of clean coal. I'm sorry that I stuffed that in there in a question that it wasn't 100% relevant to.
No, I think that was great. The one thing I was going to talk about, just say when we talked about why now, is when you're bringing up the workforce, let's make coal cool and go to work using AI. If coal does follow the lead or becomes the leader in this technology, you can honestly say we're not a relic. Like, we're leading the technology charge, and we're finding ways to improve our business with AI, and we're embracing it rather than watching it go by us.
I 100% agree. And I think it would be like a much deserved and kind of thrilling underdog story.
I agree. I like that. You talked about a little bit about the flotation and wanting to bring that up, but is there one last thing that you really would like our listeners to know about Realm or AI in particular that we haven't talked about?
Yeah. So, there's lots and lots of hype around AI right now, and it's easy to get misled. My understand is that executives at industrials, and that includes coal, are kind of receiving pressure from the board, like, hey, implement AI. And it's like, well, how? What does that mean? And so my view is that AI isn't something we should just try and slap on everything. It should be used intelligently and strategically where appropriate. And Realm's point of view is the way to do that is deep integration with the systems and data at your organization. So it's not the case, right, that you can open up ChatGPT and say, hey, can you just hook into my driver dash cams and tell me when someone is driving and is fatigued, and then notify them and notify the safety manager, right? You can't do that. So there needs to be a bridge between this AI capability and your actual operations, which every mine is unique. There's a lot of overlap in systems used, But there needs to be that bridge in order for you to get the maximal benefit of AI. And so we're here to be a partner in that. And the final thing I would say is, Realm does build its own models for really specific use cases. An example of that will be what we just discussed in terms of froth flotation. But there's the whole of Silicon Valley and elsewhere innovating on AI constantly. So we're talking about OpenAI, Google, Anthropic, Meta, and the entire cadre of open source models. So our job is partially as well to bring the best models, and they are, new ones being released every day, new updates every day. Open source is moving at light speed. So to abstract all of that complexity, what is the best tool for the job across thousands of tools that are constantly changing, and just bring that to bear on your organization and systems, and present you with workflows that make sense to mining operations.
Myles, I appreciate that. Thank you so much. And this has been an incredible conversation. I told you I was excited about it because it's certainly something new and different for the coal industry. And I believe that we've probably dispelled some myths out there, and hopefully people will see this as the intro to bringing AI into their operations. Your message has been clear. Coal is not a relic of the past. It's the backbone of America's future. Truly something I believe, and you're helping shape the future of coal. And AI is a once-in-a-generation tool to ensure that futures is strong, safe, and innovative. I also want to extend our appreciation as new members of the ACC, and so happy that you see the value in our organization. It's been a pleasure talking with you, and certainly looking forward to seeing what Realm's going to do for the industry. For those listening, if you want to learn more about Realm Alliance, please visit realmalliance.com. And in the coming months, you'll also see more from Realm supporting mine operations in the upcoming features in the American Coal Magazine and our annual buyer guide. To our listeners, thank you for joining us on Coal Nation. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and YouTube for more conversations shaping the coal industry of the future. Until next time, I'm Emily Arthun. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you.
Thank you for having me, Emily.
Thanks so much, Myles.
Thank you for tuning in to Coal Nation, the official podcast of the American Coal Council. Our mission is to share coal's story and showcase its critical role in powering our economy and supporting our way of life. If you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to subscribe. The American Coal Council represents members across the entire coal supply chain and advocates tirelessly for our vital industry. There is strength in numbers, and we'd love for you to be part of the conversation. By joining ACC, you gain exclusive access to the latest industry developments, a voice in our work that can benefit your business, and incredible networking opportunities. To learn more, visit www.americancoalcouncil.org. Together, we are shaping the future of coal, and it's exciting. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.